So I hope by now that you and Mr. Page have got a lifetime transcript
We have indeed.
on a screen in front of you.
Yes, thanks very much.
Before lunch, I dealt with the initial go live, namely a rolling out of a single post office in Stroud of child benefit alone to 14 people. The original timetable stipulated in the authorities' agreement envisaged that an operational trial of all key services would take place between September 1996 and June 1997, and that rollout of both the benefit payment and post office counter services would commence in July 1997. We can see that at poll 000028173. Although the initial go-live, such as it was, had been delivered on time, it soon became apparent that the original contractual timetable was unduly optimistic, and by February 1997, the three contracting parties had entered into a, quote, no-fault replan of the programme, which provided for phased implementation of the ICL pathway services with a view to completing the operational trial of the system by the 21st of November 1997 and commencing a national rollout to the post office network on the 24th of November 1997. We can see that, no need to turn it up, at Fujitsu 000-97062 and Fujitsu 000-78186. However, ongoing concerns about delays to the project prompted the three contracting parties to commission a review of the programme by PA Consulting Group, a management, information and technology consultancy, between August and September 1997. The objectives of the review were to obtain an independent assessment of, firstly, the current weaknesses and risks in the programme, secondly, the implications for its future delivery, and thirdly, options available to guarantee delivery capability. In a report delivered in October 1997, PA Consulting Group concluded that ICL Pathway had, quote, seriously misjudged, end quote, the scale of the development required to meet its contractual obligations, and had, as a result, underestimated the resources and time required to deliver the technical solution. Whilst recognising that delays had occurred in the CAPS programme, which was being developed in parallel by the Benefits Agency, and that post office counters needed to address deficiencies in its own resources, the PA Consulting Group concluded that the principal driver of further delay to the programme was likely to be ICL Pathway, and expressed doubt about the company's ability to deliver the system for rollout by the summer of 1998, observing that ICL Pathway was proposing to defer known problems and system functionality to later software releases. We can see that, no need to turn it up, at poll 000-28092. The precise causes of the delay to the programme remained a matter of dispute between the three parties. It was no secret that bugs, errors and defects were being detected during software testing. They were recorded by ICL Pathway in an incident management system known as Pinnacle. That's P-I-N and then ICL in capital letters, Pinnacle. And their existence was disclosed to the Programme Delivery Authority to enable an assessment of their business impact to be made and a decision taken as to whether efforts to resolve them could be deferred until a later software release. We can see that at FUJ 000-78989. The mere fact that such errors were being detected during software testing was not generally thought to be a cause for significant concern, at least in the early stages of software development. One issue of particular concern to the Programme Delivery Authority, however, was their ability to access ICL Pathway's design documentation in order to satisfy themselves that ICL Pathway was delivering a solution which would meet the project sponsor's requirements. Jeremy Folks, who migrated to the PDA assurance team upon award of the contract to ICL Pathway, and who will be giving evidence to the inquiry in the coming weeks, will say that ICL Pathway's senior management repeatedly refused to disclose documentation to the assurance team, citing as their reasons the terms of the private finance initiative upon which the parties' contractual arrangements have been based, and the resultant transfer to ICL Pathway of the risks associated with design and development of the system. Both Mr. Fawkes and John Meager attribute this obstruction, at least in part, to Terry Austin, the ICL Pathway Systems Director. And we will see that in due course on Mr. Fawkes' part at WITN 05970100 at paragraph 77 to 79, and on Mr. Meager's part at WITN 04150100 at paragraph 15. For its part, ICL Pathway's stance, as articulated in a position paper dated the 5th of March 1998, was that Post Office counters and the Benefits Agency were improperly interfering in the design process and thereby causing significant delays to the programme. You can see that position paper at poll 3031117. So you may wish to consider in due course whether ICL Pathway's apparent reluctance to grant the PDA access to design documentation reflected concerns about the quality of such documentation, or indeed the absence of such documentation. But whatever the true causes were of the considerable slippage in the programme timetable, it's apparent from the evidence obtained by the inquiry that the delay in rollout of the system had a very detrimental effect upon the finances of each of the contracting parties. We can see that by way of example at poll 28495. The business case for the Department of Social Security had been predicated upon achieving substantial fraud savings which were not being realised during the prolonged development of the system. Moreover, the department was itself incurring additional administrative costs in funding the work of the PDA and the parallel CAPS programme. ICL Pathway's remuneration for designing and developing the system was deferred under the authorities' agreement until the system had been rolled out, whereupon it was entitled to recover charges measured by reference to the volume of transactions processed by the system. In the meantime, ICL Pathway faced a significant increase in its projected development costs by reason of the additional time and resources required to design and develop the system. Although Post Office Counters was arguably less exposed than the other contracting parties, it was also vulnerable to cost inflation and was losing out on anticipated new sources of income. You may wish to consider in due course what, if any, effect these financial pressures had upon later decision-making as to the timing and acceptance, the timing of acceptance and rollout of the system. As a result of the weaknesses in project management exposed by the PA Consulting Group review, the decision was taken to abolish the Programme Delivery Authority in April 1998 and transfer responsibility for managing the development and delivery of ICL Pathway services to a dedicated team within Post Office Counters named Horizon. This team was led by David Miller, the newly appointed Horizon Programme Director. One aspect of ICL Pathway's solution, which was critically important to Post Office Counters, was the electronic point of sale service, the EPOS. As I have already explained, this element of the service was responsible for processing the transactions carried out within post office branches by customers purchasing products and services of the post office. EPOS represented the new automated mechanism by which sub-postmasters would be required to account to the post office for the products and services sold in their branches. The reliability of the data processed by EPOS was therefore essential to enable the accurate reconciliation of the physical cash and stock held in the branch with the transactions performed by the sub-postmaster at the counter. It would appear, however, that from a relatively early stage in the development process, ICL Pathway had itself concerns about the reliability of the EPOS application. You will be hearing from Terry Austin, Systems Director at ICL Pathway, who will state that he became aware of, quote, a quality issue, end quote, with the early versions of EPOS software, which had been developed using what's described as a rapid application development technique, which I understand to be an approach to software development that focuses more on ongoing software projects and user feedback and less on following a strict plan of development and testing cycles. Mr. Austin will explain that this agile but immature technique was rarely used in the development of large IT systems, but had been developed by ICL Pathway due to the very tight timescales for delivery of the service and the absence of aided detailed business requirement specification. Due to concerns about the robustness of the EPOS application, ICL Pathway decided in July 1997 to instruct Isha, you'll remember they were the small American company responsible for developing the RIPOS platform, to re-engineer the EPOS code. According to Mr. Austin, the EPOS product was returned by Isha in November 1997, whereupon further functional changes and software fixes were applied to it by ICL Pathway. We'll see that in due course at WIT N 04190100 at paragraphs 22 to 23. It would appear from the evidence obtained by the inquiry that these measures did not resolve the problem of the EPOS software's underlying instability. As a result of ongoing concerns about the volume of bugs, errors and defects detected in the EPOS application, Terry Austin requested that a team of developers be established, known as the EPOS Pinnacle Task Force, in order to identify the nature and cause of the outstanding defects in EPOS and to fix them. The task force operated between August and September 1998 with the principal objective of reducing to zero the number of pinnacles recorded against the EPOS application. In a report produced in September 1998 by Jan Holmes, ICL Pathway Quality and Audit Manager, and Dave McDonnell, Senior Software Developer, it was observed that, quote, there were significant deficiencies in the EPOS product, its code and design. The cross-reference to that is FUJ 30806990. The authors of this report attributed this deficiency to, quote, a combination of poor technical design, bad programming, and ill-thought-out bug fixes, end quote. Moreover, they observed that, quote, the negative impact of these factors will continue and spread as long as the pinnacle fixing culture continues, partly due to the nature/size of the bug fixing task and partly due to the quality and professional of certain individuals within the team. If we can just look at that, please. It's FUJ 30806990. And if we can turn to page 17, please. And look at paragraph 7.3. Although parts of the EPOS code are well written, significant sections are a combination of poor technical design, bad programming, and ill thought out bug fixes. The negative impact of these factors will continue and spread as long as the pinnacle fixing culture continues. This is partly due to the nature size of the bug fixing task and partly due to the quality and professionalism of certain individuals within the team. And then some examples are given. The report warned that the application of what were described as fixes to the code, which had in 1997 been re-engineered by Isha, created additional risks to the underlying stability of the product. The authors of the report expressed the fear that code decay, as it was called, code decay, which I understand to mean the tendency for computer software to become gradually worse in performance or responsiveness over time, eventually leading it to become completely faulty, unresponsive, or unstable. And code decay might be caused because the code has been updated or altered in ways that have introduced more bugs and errors over time, especially in the light of the increasing difficulty or intricacy of the code modification. So the authors expressed fear that code decay will, assume it hasn't happened already, cause the product to, quote, become unstable. And, quote, they observed that, quote, there is no guarantee that a pinnacle fix or additional functionality can be made without adversely affecting, is I think how the report was meant to read, but it says affect, another part of the system. We can see that earlier in the same document at page 7. And under EPOS code, at the top there, it is clear that senior members of the task force are extremely concerned about the quality of code in the EPOS product. And then reading on a sentence, since then, many hundreds of pinnacle fixes have been applied to the code, and the fear is that code decay will, assuming it hasn't already, cause the product to become unstable. This presents a situation where there is no guarantee that a pinnacle fix or additional functionality can be made without adversely affecting, I've added, another part of the system. It's currently unclear whether the concerns that were being voiced internally by employees of ICL Pathway were, in the autumn of 1998, communicated to post office counters, or indeed appropriately addressed within ICL Pathway by the senior management of the company. You may wish to consider in due course whether there was a failure by the senior management of ICL Pathway to be candid with post office counters about the nature and scale of the problems which it encountered during the development of the EPOS product, and if so, what, if any, effect this had upon post office counters' later decision to proceed with the project in spite of the benefit agency's decision to withdraw from it. Whether or not ICL Pathway were concealing from post office counters the true extent of any issues they were experiencing with EPOS, it is apparent that senior managers within post office counters were aware of some concerns about the development of the EPOS application. We can see some examples of that, no need to turn them up now, at poll 30-28587 and poll 30-28323. During phase 3 of the inquiry, you will be hearing evidence from David Smith, the head of automation transformation, who will state that, quote, it was known that work on the desktop started in London but was then sent across to the US before being sent back to the UK for completion. This created some suspicion that Pathway weren't up to the task. The reference for that is WITN 052 901 00 at paragraph 35. Mr. Smith will explain that he later commissioned a report from a consultant employed by French Thornton, as they were then called, who was briefly granted access to ICL Pathway to details of the EPOS design. The consultant reported back that ICL Pathway had not adopted a modular design in the development of EPOS, but rather a method by which all transactions were routed, quote, through a core horizon. The consequence of adopting this approach was that when a new transaction was added, he said, it would, through its core, be linked to other transactions, and it could introduce error into pre-existing transactions. The senior management of post office counters were advised that the problems posed by this method of design could not easily be remedied, and the adoption of a new approach would require the EPOS application to be rewritten. The cross-reference to that is WITN 052 90100 at paragraphs 41 to 45. By reason of continued slippage in the project timetable, Post Office Counters and the Benefits Agency had by early 1998 begun to prepare for potential litigation with ICL Pathway in the event that the Horizon system could not be delivered to a satisfactory state or within a reasonable timescale. In order better to understand where responsibility lay for ICL Pathway's future failure to complete the operational trial by the revised deadline of November 1997 and the overall strengths and weaknesses of their case, Post Office Counters and the Benefits Agency instructed a firm called Project Monitors, who were an independent firm of consultants, to provide expert assistance. Having initially conducted a number of investigations into the causes of the delay to the programme, project mentors were instructed to carry out an assessment of the requirements analysis undertaken by Pathway for the benefit payment service. In carrying out that analysis, project mentors did not have access to ICL Pathway's own internal documentation and instead relied upon documents in the possession of the project sponsors which had either been produced to them or which had been disclosed by ICL Pathway. The cross-reference for that is POL 303114. In a report dated the 18th of December 1998, Project Mentors found that ICL Pathway had, quote, made no attempt to undertake requirements analysis in accordance with normal industry practice, end quote, despite having access to the sponsor's requirements for the benefit payment service at the time of entering into the contract. As a result of this failure, the sponsor's expert concluded that ICL Pathway had designed and partially built a system without knowing whether it fully met the requirements of the Department of Social Security. Project Mentors acknowledged in their report that the analysis which they had undertaken was restricted to the benefit payment service. However, they expressed, quote, grave concerns, end quote, that the same lack of professional analysis would be apparent in other areas of the system, and articulated a particular concern about the EPOS application. The cross-reference to that is POL 303114 at paragraphs 2.2 and 2.3.4. Reflecting on the impact that this failure was likely to have upon the future of the programme, Project Mentors made an important observation. I wonder whether we could look at POL 303114. And in particular, page 7. Try page 11, please. And then one more page, please. Thank you. Perfect. Under its conclusion, impacts on the programme in the future, Project Mentors said, our experience of systems where requirements have not been analysed satisfactorily is that the system fails to meet the user's needs. An effective acceptance test will identify many such failings, necessitating considerable rework. The result is a significant extension of the time and cost required to complete the system and roll it out. The alternative is to allow unacceptable processing in the operational environment with unpredictable and potentially damaging results. In our opinion, the failure to satisfactorily analyse the requirements for the benefits payment system makes it unlikely that the user's needs will be met by the current pathway system. We can take that down. The findings of this report were circulated to senior managers within the benefits agency and also within Post Office Counters, including David Miller, the Horizons Programme Director, who will be giving evidence during phase 2 of this inquiry. The evidence of distribution is given in poll 3038829. It's presently unclear what action was taken by post office counters and the Benefits Agency to address the concerns which had been articulated by their independent expert, project mentors, in December 1998. You, sir, may wish to explore what, if any, efforts were made by those who had knowledge of these concerns to bring them to the attention of senior officials and ministers within government who were at that stage charged with making decisions about the future of the Horizon project. Can I turn then to the third topic in the phase 2 opening, namely the Treasury review and the cancellation of the benefit payment card. I'd like to begin by saying a few words about the relationship that existed at this time between the Post Office and the government. By the late 1960s, the Post Office had ceased to be run as a Department of State and had instead been transformed into a statutory corporation. Its governing body consisted of a chairman and board members, each of whom were appointed by the Minister of Posts and Telecommunications, subsequently the Secretary of State for the Department of Trade and Industry. See Section 6 of the Post Office Act 1969. The day-to-day operations of the Post Office were largely managed independently of government. However, the Secretary of State was empowered to give directions to the Post Office, with which the chairman and board were obliged to comply. See Section 11 of the Post Office Act 1969. As its sponsoring department, the DTI exercised oversight of the Post Office through its Postal Directorate and was kept abreast of significant developments in the programme to automate post office counters and the payment of benefits. As I've already explained, ICL Pathway had failed to meet the revised contractual deadline to complete an operational live trial of the new Horizon system by the 21st of November 1997. As a result of this default, the Programme Delivery Authority wrote to John Bennett, Managing Director of ICL Pathway, on the 24th of November 1997, formally notifying him on behalf of both the DSS and Post Office counters that ICL Pathway was considered to have breached its contractual obligations. We can see that letter at poll 3028442. ICL Pathway disputed that it was in breach of contract and attributed the delays to a variety of factors, including, first, insufficient specification in the sponsor's requirements, 2, later attempts by the sponsors to enhance those requirements, 3, improper interference by the sponsors in the design of the system, and 4, delays in the CAPS programme. We can see that response from ICL Pathway at poll 3031117. By early February 1998, the Department of Social Security was sufficiently concerned about the state of the project that Harriet Harman, that then Secretary of State, wrote to Tony Blair, the then Prime Minister, to notify him that there was, quote, a serious risk, end quote, that the project would fail either to deliver its objectives at all or to do so within a worthwhile timescale. I wonder whether we can look at that, please, at CBO 6041. Ah, perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. So this is the letter from Harriet Harman to Tony Blair. Prime Minister, I'm writing to alert you to problems with a private/public sector project designed to improve the benefit payment system and automate the post office network. In a nutshell, there is a serious risk that this project will fail to deliver its objectives, or will not do so within a timescale that will make it worthwhile. We have inherited this £1 billion project from our predecessors. Under the PFI programme, ICL were contracted by my department, jointly with post office counters, to fund the development of a system which would provide an automated means of paying benefits through a benefit payment card to replace our current expensive and insecure paper-based methods, and on the back of this to provide some additional technology to post offices with the aim of helping Post Office Counters Limited to expand the range of their future business. The project was supposed to be fully operational in all post offices by the end of this year, but due to a long history of problems, ICL have been unable to deliver to this timetable, so that the completion date has now been extended by 2 years to 2000 at the earliest, with a consequential loss to us of around £200 million in fraud savings foregone. This 2-year delay also brings with it funding consequences, both for ourselves and for the private contractor. These and some continuing major concerns about the project's deliverability have led us to the view it would be prudent to take stock before committing to further investment. In doing so, it must be right to look at the medium and longer-term government objectives for a modern welfare system and the best way to sustain a rural post office network into the millennium and beyond. The questions that this will raise have far-reaching consequences, which could impact on our future capacity to deliver the benefit payment service people want, and on the future of the post office network, vital to so many of our communities. You will anyway wish to be aware, because of the wide-ranging ministerial interest involved and the need to reach a cross-government consensus on the best route forward. The primary departmental responsibilities fall to Margaret, Beckett and me, but there are also significant issues around rural policy, the government IT infrastructure, and strategies to promote social cohesion. It is now urgent to reach a decision on the best way forward, because further investment will be required if the project is to continue. It's also possible that ICL, the private contractor concerned, may give their version of the story to the press at any moment, in an attempt to influence the outcome. There are inherent dangers of damaging media speculation, especially around the future of post office. As you know, the post office involvement means there could be matters here arousing strong public interest and opinions. There is already some speculation in the specialist press. You may also wish to be kept informed because ICL are part of the Fujitsu Empire, with whom you have had some contact on your recent visit to Japan, and there is also a constituency dimension for you. More about that later. The immediate urgency on the financing of the project means that John Denham, who is leading this work here, will need to write very shortly to Alistair Darling on the funding issues. Although we have a clear view about the best route forward, I am clear that we should at all costs seek to avoid getting focused too closely on individual departmental interests, and that we should aim to establish an agreed view from the start, avoiding the potentially damaging effects that our quite legitimately differing departmental views can have when exposed to the public eye. On this basis, I shall be seeking to discuss with Alistair and Margaret in the near future. A copy of this also goes to Gordon Brown. Miss Harman's letter to the Prime Minister appears to have prompted the intervention of Alistair Darling, the then Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and triggered the establishment in early March 1998 of the Interdepartmental Horizon Project Review Group. The group comprised of senior officials drawn from the Treasury, the Department of Trade and Industry, and the Department of Social Security. Leadership of the group was provided by senior Treasury officials, as a result of which the work undertaken by the group came to be known as, quote, the Treasury Review. During its inaugural meeting, the group identified two distinct stages to the review. The first was a project assessment intended to evaluate the viability and likely costs of continuing with the Horizon programme. The second stage involved contingency planning to establish the alternative options open to government in the event that the decision was taken to cancel the project. We can see that planning at CBO 6017 and BEIS, BIS 40104. Responsibility for the project assessment was entrusted to 3 individuals who collectively became known as, quote, the Treasury Review Panel. The panel was chaired by Adrian Montague, Chief Executive of the Treasury PFI Task Force, and also comprised Bill Robbins, Director General of Communications and Information Services in the Ministry of Defence, and Alec Wiley, Chief Executive of the Social Security Agency for Northern Ireland. PA Consulting Group, the consultancy firm which had earlier produced a report back in October 1997 into the causes of the project delays, was also instructed to support the work of the panel by conducting an assessment of the technical viability of the Horizon programme. In a report dated July 1998, the Treasury Review Panel concluded that the programme was, quote, technically viable, meaning, I think, viable from a technological point of view and perspective, as opposed to theoretically viable. Whilst recognising that there were some risks relating to the scalability and robustness, given that the system had been tested only at the level of its component parts, the panel stated that it was satisfied that these risks were being, quote, well managed by ICL Pathway. The panel also observed that, quote, the basic infrastructure is very robust for the future, and in the main, industry standard products have been used. The cross-reference to that is POL 2028094. Adrian Montague, the chair of the panel, who will be giving evidence to the inquiry, will state, quote, none of the shortcomings of the Horizon system that came to dog the project in later years were or could have been evident at the stage that the panel made its assessment. He explains, amongst other things, that much of the system's functionality was still under development at that stage, and it wasn't possible at that stage to undertake acceptance testing of the system in live operation. The cross-reference to that is WIT N 04000100 at paragraph 11. You will also be hearing from Peter Copping, Director of PA Consulting Group, who conducted the technical aspects of the project assessment on behalf of the panel. He will explain that he carried out several investigations for the panel involving meetings and one-to-one discussions with ICL Pathway, the Benefits Agency, and Post Office counters. The cross-reference to that is WITN 039700100. As you will recall, ICL Pathway was sufficiently concerned by this time about the robustness of the EPOS application that it would, within a matter of weeks, establish a dedicated task force to address the significant volume of suspected errors, bugs, and defects in the EPOS system. The cross-reference is Fujitsu 3080690. Given the extent of the concern within ICL Pathway about the reliability of the EPOS application, you, sir, may wish to explore the extent to which these matters were brought to the attention of the Treasury Review Panel, and how, if at all, they affected the panel's assessment of the developing system's fitness for purpose. The Treasury Review Panel ultimately concluded that termination of the entire project was not a viable option on the grounds that it would further delay the automation of post office counters, leading to the likely loss of future income, and would cause significant reputational and financial harm to ICL Pathway. In the alternative, the panel proposed a restructuring of the programme, in which either the benefit card would be rolled out and transfer to payment by ACT would be deferred until post office counters infrastructure had adapted to support banking, financial services and other applications with an agreed contract extension, which would reduce the overall loss to ICL Pathway. This was described by the panel as option 1. Or B, the benefit payment card would be abandoned and the paper-based method of paying benefits would continue until Post Office Counters was ready to complete for delivery by ACT, with compensation being made to ICL Pathway for the reduction in the scope of its contract. This was described by the panel as option 2. The cross-references there are POL 3028094 in Annex A. Upon receipt of the panel's recommendations, the Horizon Project Review Group, which had now been renamed as the Horizon Working Group, produced its own report in which the divisions within government over the future of the project were very plainly exposed. Neither the DSS nor the Social Security team within the Treasury were in favour of pursuing option 1 on the grounds that it would postpone full migration to payment via ACT by up to 5 years. It would involve 2 significant changes in the method of payment to benefit recipients over the space of a few years, and it would leave the DSS exposed to the costs of further delay. The cross-reference there is HMT 6034 at paragraph 4.3.2. The DSS favoured cancellation of the benefit payment card, whereas the Social Security team within the Treasury favoured terminating the entire project. We can see that in the same reference at paragraph 1.7. By contrast, the remaining members of the working group, including the Department for Trade and Industry, were in favour of proceeding with the benefit payment card, subject to agreeing suitable terms with ICL Pathway. They envisaged that a contract extension would be needed, but stipulated that there should be no increase in the level of remuneration paid to ICL Pathway. They said that if ICL Pathway was not prepared to accept these terms, or the negotiation of terms for a contract extension were unsuccessful, it was recommended that Post Office Counters and the DSS should terminate the contract on the grounds of ICL Pathway's non-performance. Same reference, paragraph 1.7. The report produced by the Horizon Working Group requested, quote, an early steer, end of quote, from ministers, but acknowledged that there were a number of competing considerations and that any litigation with ICL Pathway would, quote, inevitably be messy and uncertain, end quote. Same reference, paragraph 1.5. Ministers ultimately sanctioned a time-limited period of negotiation with ICL Pathway with a view to agreeing suitable terms for the continuation of the project in its original guise. Stephen Byers, then Chief Secretary to the Treasury, appointed Graham Corbett, Deputy Chairman of the Monopolies and Mergers Commission, to act as a, quote, troubleshooter and to facilitate the negotiations. By October 1998, Graham Corbett reported back to the Chief Secretary that the parties had been unable to reach agreement on a commercial basis for continuing the full project. As a precondition for delivering the contractual services, ICL Pathway had demanded a positive return on its investment. This position was unacceptable to ministers, as it sought to reverse the contractual allocation of risk, which Pathway had agreed in the spring of 1996, and was therefore accordingly rejected. The cross-references to that report are Bayes 40284 and POL 3028098. Further attempts to salvage the project were made by Post Office Counters and ICL Pathway in late autumn 1998. As part of those ongoing negotiations, ICL Pathway proposed changes to the contractual terms for the acceptance of the system. I shall address those contractual terms a little later in the opening. However, for present purposes, it's sufficient to note that ICL Pathway's proposals envisage the system being accepted and the project sponsors' rights of termination being lost upon the conclusion of technical and model office tests rather than an operational live trial. Moreover, ICL Pathway proposed a relaxation in the criteria for acceptance, which would have resulted in the system being rolled out nationwide with a much higher incidence of unresolved technical defects. The cross-reference there is POL 3028679. Whilst these proposals were under consideration, the results from ICL Pathway's latest round of software testing were being assessed by Mr. David Miller, the program director for Horizon, and found to reveal, quote, significant problems with the way Horizon passes information through to TIP, that is, transaction information processing. We can see that in his memo dated the 16th of November 1998. I wonder whether we could turn that up. It's poll 3028421. You can see the date of the 16th of November 1998, the distribution list at the top. And in the second paragraph, Mr. Miller says, we are due to start the model office test proper and final pass of end-to-end on the 14th of December 1998. My present assessment is that there are some significant problems with the way Horizon passes information through to TIP. These relate to the provision of balanced outlet cash. I'll read that again. These relate to the provision of balanced outlet cash accounts and the processing of the ensuing information via TIP. Whilst we allocated some extra time during the Corbett review to sort out any outstanding issues, we need to be aware of a potential threat to the 14th of December date. As I explained in my introduction to the design and development of Horizon, TIP, Transaction Information Processing, was a system developed by post office counters to obtain cash account and transaction data from Horizon in order to feed that data back into post office counters' existing accounting systems. It is evident from Mr. Miller's memo that these results were of significant concern to post office counters and threatened to cause further delay to the software testing cycles which needed to be completed prior to entry into the operational live trial of the system. In the light of the poor results which had emerged from the software testing performed in the autumn of 1998, you, sir, may wish to consider whether ICL Pathways' proposal to make significant changes to the conditions for acceptance reflected, in fact, a lack of confidence in the integrity and robustness of their own solution. That document can come down, please. One of the principal reasons why the Treasury Review Panel had discounted the option of terminating the entire contract in July 1998 was the harm which ICL would have suffered to its reputation and finances. By October 1998, ICL was projected to sustain losses of more than £200 million in the event that the project was cancelled. We can see that from poll 3028098. Losses of that magnitude were not only a cause for serious concern to ICL, but also to Fujitsu Japan, which by this stage had acquired all of the company's shareholding. In early December 1998, Michio Naruto, vice chairman of Fujitsu and chairman of ICL, contacted Sir David Wright, the British ambassador to Japan, to articulate Fujitsu's concerns about the progress of negotiations over the future of the Horizon project. Mr. Naturo warned the British ambassador that the failure of the project would have, quote, serious repercussions for Fujitsu's international standing, lead to major internal difficulties with Fujitsu, and the collapse of ICL. The cross-reference there is Bayes 40336 and 7. In a subsequent report sent to the Cabinet Office, the Treasury, the DTI, and the DSS, dated the 4th of December 1998, Sir David Wright, the ambassador, expressed the view that Fujitsu were not making idle threats about the future viability of ICL, which, he said, if permitted to fail, would, quote, have profound implications for jobs in the UK and for bilateral ties. He observed that the failure of the Horizon project would, quote, be damaging politically at home and to the UK's position of strength in Japan as against its European competitors. The cross-reference there is, again, Bayes 40336. Within a matter of days, the question of the project's future was escalated to the then Prime Minister, Tony Blair. I wonder whether we could look, please, at CBO 201401. So there seems to be a problem with that. Evidence that not all IT projects move smoothly. Although it's early, this is a relatively important document. I just asked for 10 minutes. If we take our break early, and I'll ensure that that's, or seek to ensure that that's uploaded to the system and viewable by everyone concerned.
Excellent. Right, 10 minutes.
So thank you for the time that you allowed me. You'll remember that I had just spoken about communications from Michio Naruto to Sir David Bright, the British ambassador in Japan, and then the escalation of those concerns to the Cabinet Office, the Treasury and the DTI, and then the reference made by Jeff Mulgan to the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Can we turn up, please, CBO 201 301? This is the minute or memorandum about which I was speaking before the break from Jeff Mulgan, a senior civil servant in the Cabinet Office and a member of the Horizon Working Group, as it had then become.
Could I just have the reference number again? It's gone off the top of the...
CBO
yeah.
201 401.
4 zeros. Okay.
CBO indicating that this was disclosed to us by the Cabinet Office.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got it, yeah.
You'll see it's addressed to the Prime Minister and the copy list on the top right-hand side. In paragraph 1, Mr. Mulgan says a decision now needs to be taken on whether to proceed with the Horizon project. You will recall this is the initiative to automate the post office network involving ICL. The project is nearly 3 years behind schedule, having been plagued with problems. Negotiations have been underway since the summer to find a way to continue the project. And then over the page, please, at paragraph 4. However, the decision is not clear-cut. The problems that have beset this project may well continue. Continuation would lock the government in for 10 to 12 years to what many see as a flawed system. Cancellation, on the other hand, would enable the Post Office to take advantage of newer, cheaper and more flexible technology, while the DSS could move rapidly to paying benefits into people's bank accounts. Cancellation would also release about £2 to £3 billion over the next decade to be spent in other ways to support and automate the Post Office. Paragraph 6. In making a judgment, the following issues are paramount. First, the virtues of the project itself. Overall, Horizon now looks increasingly flawed. It's centred around a technology, the Benefit Payment Card, BPC, that's both over-engineered and very expensive and likely soon to be obsolete. Indeed, ICL acknowledged that BPC will have no commercial value to them at the end of the project. Although they remain underdeveloped, the alternatives, which involve simpler off-the-shelf banking technology, look increasingly attractive, offering a route to universal banking, automated post offices, and better provision of government information. Secondly, the effects on the post office network. Cancellation would undoubtedly be destabilising. Sub-postmasters fear that without Horizon, they will lose their customer base. Their concerns can partially, but not wholly, be addressed through commitments on subsidy and through commitments on subsidy and promises that there will be government support for an alternative automation system. Rural sub-postmasters' fears will be particularly acute. Subsidies could be structured to keep the great majority of these open, but whatever happens, there will be a continuing stream of closures. Third, effects on ICL. Cancellation would directly affect 270 jobs and more in ICL and more in suppliers. It would destroy ICL's prospects of flotation and lead to a heavy £200 million loss this year. Although even if the project continues, the £250 million losses incurred so far may at some point have to be written off. MB, the figures in the attached paper are wrong on this issue. Cancellation would also have a big effect on their reputation. It would probably force the resignation of the chief executive and will put them into a protracted legal battle with government, in which they would seek to pin the blame on government in general and DSS in particular. Fourth, Effects on Fujitsu. Fujitsu have provided the financial commitment to secure a deal. This is a sign of how important the project is for them. There would undoubtedly be a cost in terms of UK relationships with them in particular, and possibly with Japanese investors in general. They would argue that the government was guilty of a breach of faith, blaming ICL for what is in effect a change of policy. Fifth, effects on PFI. Continuation would set a precedent for renegotiating PFIs that are failing. Cancellation would make funding of large IT projects harder in the future. And then finally over the page, the sixth point, effects on benefit agencies and welfare reform. Continuation would hold up ACT. DSS estimate that they would save £800 million if the project was cancelled. The government would lose the opportunity to bank the unbanked. In paragraph 7, Mr. Mulgan observed that government departments remained divided on the project. Alistair Darling remains strongly opposed to continuing. Ian McCartney for DTI will argue strongly for accepting a deal. Peter Mandelson has largely kept out of the discussions. The Treasury is divided at an official level, but Stephen Byers will probably, on balance, want to accept the deal for pragmatic reasons, even though he would prefer to cancel. And at paragraph 8, he said, at first glance, most of these factors point towards continuation. However, my view, which Lord Falconer broadly shares, is that although short-term considerations and expenditure point strongly towards making a deal, this will in the long run prove unsatisfactory, leaving the Post Office and government dependent on a hugely expensive, inflexible, inappropriate and possibly unreliable system. In our view, the best outcome would be a deal with ICL to continue with an automation strategy which drops the benefit payment card, but focuses instead on helping the Post Office to provide banking services. This would enable a rapid move towards ACT and Post Office automation, but without the many problems associated with the benefit payment card. It would also enable good relations to be maintained with ICL and Fujitsu. The cost to government and ICL resulting from the benefit payment card could legitimately be blamed on the previous government. However, it will not be possible to reach this position without first rejecting ICL's offer and making it clear that the government no longer wishes to continue with Horizon in its present form. There would then be a danger that ICL would refuse to negotiate over a deal which included the benefit payment cards. In other words, this option is feasible. It's only feasible if the government is prepared to accept the significant risk that it would, in practice, lead to complete cancellation. Our view is that the case for cancellation is just strong enough to warrant that risk, although it would need to be announced alongside a strong package of support for post offices and for an alternative automation strategy. There are essentially three options. Option one, attempt to conclude a deal broadly along the lines offered by ICL. Option two, seek a deal with ICL, but excluding the benefit payment card. Option three, reject ICL's offer, moving to terminate the project and press forward with an alternative. Do you wish to give a steer? And then the handwritten addition appears to say, I would favour option one, but for GM's statement, perhaps, that the system itself is flawed. Surely there must be a clear view on this. Speak to me on Monday, i.e., reading the enclosed paper. It's all on the financial deal, but there the risks are pretty even, probably coming down on the side of continuing. The real heart of it is the system itself. We can get some further light on that on the next document that I would like you to look at, please, which is CBO, I think 709. Thank you. This is the formal response to Jeff Mulgan's submission, coming from Jeremy Hayward, the late Jeremy Hayward, the Prime Minister's Principal Private Secretary, on the 14th of December 1998. in the following terms. You'll see it's addressed to Mr. Mulgan from the Prime Minister's Principal Private Secretary, Jeremy Hayward. The Prime Minister was grateful for your minute of the 9th of December. The Prime Minister was concerned about your view that the benefit payment card is over-engineered and is likely soon to be obsolete. His clear preference would be to avoid cancelling the project, but to go for a variant of your option 1 and 2. We should retain the benefit payment card, but seek to ensure that over time it delivers real benefits and provides an effective transition path to a satisfactory long-term position. If necessary, the Prime Minister thinks it may be sensible to give ICL a financial incentive to improve the benefit payment card project in this way. That can come down, thank you. After further interdepartmental negotiations reached an impasse in late December 1998, the Prime Minister was again invited to make a decision on the future of the project. Again, this was communicated through his Principal Private Secretary, Jeremy Hayward, who again wrote to Jeff Mulgan, this time on the 6th of January 1999. Can we look, please, at CBO 6019? You'll see the addressee and the author, Jeremy Hayward. The Prime Minister was grateful for your minute of the 24th of December. I've skipped over that in the interest of some speed. The Prime Minister thinks that we should proceed as follows. 1, we should indicate to ICL as soon as possible that we want to have further discussions with them on how the BPC project can be developed to facilitate the earliest possible move to smart cards. 2, but we should also make clear to them that if agreement cannot be reached within a specified time period on a development of the current project along these lines, the government will stick with the current project. Notwithstanding 2, the Prime Minister is clear that we should seek to move as quickly as possible to paying benefits directly into bank accounts via a smart card facility that can be used in post offices. You will be hearing from Ian McCartney, Minister of State in the Department of Trade and Industry, who will say that these decisions of the Prime Minister to, quote, take cancellation off the table was an important moment. It was an important moment, he says, in the cross-governmental debate over the future of the Horizon project. The cross-reference to that is WIT N 03370100. The Prime Minister's intervention did not, however, lead to an immediate resolution of the stalemate within government, as the DSS remained firmly opposed to the continuation of the benefit payment card. Alistair Darling will give evidence to the inquiry about the opinion which he formed of the project upon being appointed Secretary of State for the DSS in July 1998. You will hear his view that the benefit payment card he considered, whether it was right throughout the period of negotiation, was the right way to achieve the effective and long-term reform of the benefit payment system. As the negotiations with ICL Pathway dragged on into the spring of 1999, further pressure was brought to bear on the UK government by Fujitsu. Tadashi Sekizawa, chairman of Fujitsu, wrote to the Prime Minister in a without prejudice letter of the 7th of April 1999, claiming that Fujitsu would be required to make a provision in its accounts of approximately £300 million unless a legally binding agreement for the future of Horizon was in place by the 23rd of April 1999. Mr. Sekizawa warned the Prime Minister that neither ICL nor Fujitsu would be prepared to make any further investment in the development of the Horizon system if Fujitsu were obliged to make such a provision in its accounts, and expressed the hope that a resolution of the commercial negotiations could be reached. That's CBO 6033. Mr. Sekizawa's letter was followed by a meeting between the Prime Minister himself and Mr. Michio Naturo, as I've said, the then Vice Chairman of Fujitsu and Chairman of ICL plc, on the 12th of April 1999, in which a discussion took place relating to the future of the Horizon project, so within 5 days of the receipt of the Fujitsu letter. The cross-reference to that is CBO 6059 at page 5. You'll be hearing from Steve Robson, a senior civil servant in the Treasury, who was instructed to lead on the negotiations with ICL in early 1999, and who attended the meeting between the Prime Minister and Mr. Naturo on the 12th of April 1999. He will state that the Prime Minister gave no commitment to Mr. Naturo at that meeting. You will wish to consider what, if any, influence the pressure brought to bear by Fujitsu had upon the outcome of cross-governmental negotiations about the future of the project. On the 11th of May 1999, Jeremy Hayward, the Principal Private Secretary to the PM, wrote to the Chief Secretary to set out the Prime Minister's requirements for a resolution of the prolonged negotiations. The cross-reference is CBO 6053. The letter explained that, quote, any solution should meet 3 political requirements. 1, we do not want a huge political row with the Post Office or the sub-postmasters lobby claiming that the entire rural network has been put in danger by the government. 2, we should not put ICL's whole future at risk. And 3, it would be important to ensure that the government had a fully defensible position vis-à-vis the Public Accounts Committee, end quotes. By this stage, the proposal, which commanded the greatest cross-governmental support, envisaged the cancellation of the benefit payment card and the purchase by post office counters of the Horizon platform, including the EPOS and OBCS systems. This proposal did not, however, find favour with Post Office counters or the Post Office Board, with the latter, the Post Office Board, only agreeing reluctantly to sign heads of agreement with ICL Pathway to continue the project without the BPC. The cross-references to that are POL 3028612 and POL 3028609. It's currently unclear to the inquiry precisely what those responsible for deciding on the future of the project knew about the technical integrity and the robustness of the system. However, in a briefing to the from the Treasury to the Prime Minister's office dated the 23rd of April 1999, there can be found a document entitled ICL Pathway, list of failures, in which the following is recorded. Can we look, please, at CBO 6058 and at page 11. Whether we could expand on that a little bit. Thank you. Just to explain, so some of these documents are in a better format than others because some of them have been retrieved by photographing at the National Archives the document rather than being able to take them up and scan them.
Yeah.
This is one in the former category. So ICL Pathway, list of failures. This is a briefing from the Treasury to the Prime Minister. Independent reviews of the Horizon project by external IT experts have all concluded, most recently this week, that ICL Pathway have failed and are failing to meet good industry practice in taking this project forward, both in their software development work and in their management of the process. To date, in the development stages of the project, first bullet point, all planned release dates have been missed. including the key contractual milestone for completion of the operational trial, which ICL Pathway were placed in breach in November 1997. And skipping the next one, every release has been subject to reductions in the originally planned functionality. Next bullet point, and even when each release has gone live, there have been faults and problems which have resulted in the need for Pathway to reimburse DSS. Next bullet point, in the current trials, the known problems have risen from 46 in November 1998 to 139 at the end of March 1999, and currently 146 have not been resolved. It's therefore clear that some senior officials within the government were aware of technical issues with Horizon which called into question the integrity and robustness of Horizon. You, sir, will wish to explore how widespread this knowledge was within government and then what was done with that knowledge. Can I turn to the fourth and final stage of my opening in relation to Phase 2, acceptance and rollout? That document can come down, thank you. This concerns the acceptance of the Horizon system by post office counters and the decision to commence rollout of the system nationwide in January 2000. I shall begin what I mean by explaining acceptance of the Horizon system. As I explained earlier, the detailed design and development of the Horizon system was entrusted under the terms of the related agreements to ICL Pathway, who bore the risk that the system which it produced would ultimately fail to meet the requirements of post office counters and the benefit agencies, and would consequently be rejected. Responsibility for determining whether the system that had been developed by Pathway, ICL Pathway, in fact met their requirements rested with post office counters and the benefit agencies. However, their right to terminate the agreement for failure of the system to comply with these requirements was narrowly subscribed in Schedule A07 of the Authorities Agreement. There's no need to turn it up, but the cross-reference is POL 20-28163. And the right to terminate was narrowly circumscribed as follows. The authority's right of termination for failed acceptance shall only apply ... in the event that A, one or more high severity deficiencies, or B, 10 or more medium severity deficiencies remain uncorrected at the end of the operational trial period. The effect of this provision was that post office counters and the benefits agency would have been legally obliged to accept the system if on completion of the operational live trial the conditions for acceptance had been satisfied, namely that there existed no outstanding high severity deficiencies and less than 10 outstanding medium severity deficiencies within the system. By the spring of 1999, one of the key areas of dispute which emerged between post office counters and the benefit agency concerned the readiness of the Horizon system to enter the operational live trial. Between February and March 1999, ICL Pathway had for the first time conducted model office and end-to-end testing of all aspects of the technical solution, including the interfaces with post offices' back-end systems. The cross-reference there is FUJ 58445. The concerns articulated by the benefits agency in March and April 1999 appear to have centred upon four key areas. One, the number and severity of outstanding faults identified in the system during software testing. Two, the risk that significant numbers of new critical errors might emerge during the operational live trial of the system. Three, the ability of further software testing to address ongoing concerns about system stability. And four, the risk that new software changes introduced the operational live trial might undermine the integrity of the system. The cross-references there are POL 30-28407 and POL 30-28406. As a result of those concerns, the Benefits Agency refused in late April 1999 to grant approval for entry into an operational live trial, insisting instead that a further cycle of model office and end-to-end testing be undertaken. That's POL 30-43592 and POL 30-28405. You'll be hearing from Andrew Simpkins, a management consultant employed by Post Office counters to support the management of software testing and release authorization. He will state that Post Office counters considered that a further cycle of model office and end-to-end testing would be, quote, of limited benefit when compared to the value to be gained from monitoring and evaluating the experience of actual users within a limited live trial. That's WITN 06090100 at paragraph 12. So you may wish to consider in due course what efforts were made by Post Office counters to obtain feedback from end users during the live trial and the early rollout of the system, and whether these were adequate to identify and address the challenges that such end users faced. The cancellation of the benefit card payments ultimately was to resolve this impasse and enabled Post Office counters and ICL Pathway to enter an operational live trial of the Horizon system in late May 1999. By this stage, the scope of the services which ICL Pathway was obliged to deliver comprised the Electronic Point of Sale Service, the EPOS, the Order Book Control Service, the OBCS, and the Automated Payment Service, the APS, together with the supporting infrastructure necessary to deliver those services. The provision of those services by ICL Pathway became known as the Core Systems Release, FUJ 401524. It was planned that additional functionality would be included in a later software release, known as the Core Systems Release Plus, FUJ 401525. The new conditions for acceptance of the Core Systems Release, CSR, were defined in Schedule A11 of the codified agreement concluded between Post Office counters and ICL Pathway on the 28th of July 1999. That's POL 20-28208. In essence, this provided that Post Office counters will be legally obliged to accept the Horizon system if, following completion of the operational live trial, known as the core observation period by now, the thresholds for acceptance of the system had been met and a timetable had been agreed between the parties to resolve any outstanding medium severity faults, known as Category B faults. The thresholds for acceptance of the CSR, the Core Systems Release, were defined in Schedule A11 at paragraph 2.2 in the following terms. The thresholds will not be met in respect of CSR acceptance if there are, quote, one or more high severity deficiencies, known as Category A faults, more than 20 medium severity Category B faults, more than 10 Category B faults in respect of any one CSR acceptance specification. By permitting up to 20 outstanding faults of medium severity, these new thresholds represented a relaxation of the conditions for contractual acceptance as compared with that defined in the original authorities agreement. However, this lowering of the threshold for acceptance was somewhat mitigated by the requirement to have in place an agreed timetable for resolution of all such faults prior to acceptance of the Core Systems Release. The timetable for acceptance of the Core Systems Release was defined at Schedule B09 of the codified agreement. It made provision for an 8-week core observation period to run between the 31st of May 1999 and the 26th of July 1999, POL 30-28224. And upon conclusion of the core observation period, the codified agreement provided for a further 3-week operational trial period during which the parties would seek to reach agreement on the occurrence and severity of any faults or deficiencies observed during the operation live trial of the system. Poll 30282008. The principal method by which post office counters exercise its right to inspect the performance of the Horizon system during the core observation period was by raising a, quote, acceptance incident, capital A, capital I, also known as an AI. This constituted the giving of formal notice to ICL Pathway of a fault or a deficiency observed by post office counters during the live trial of the system. Under the terms of the codified agreement, ICL Pathway was responsible for assessing the severity of each acceptance incident raised by post office counters and for assigning a category to it. Schedule A11 of the codified agreement made provision for resolving disputes relating to the severity assigned by ICL Pathway to each acceptance incident. The occurrence and categorization of acceptance incidents would ultimately be determinative of whether the threshold for acceptance of the CSR had been met. Within post office counters, responsibility for managing the acceptance process rested with an acceptance board whose core membership included John Meager, Horizon Acceptance Manager, David Smith, Head of Automation Transformation, and Bruce McNiven, Horizon Program Director. Terms of reference for the acceptance board were prepared, in which its duties were defined as follows: to formally advise ICL Pathway of the acceptance outcome, to submit appropriate acceptance recommendations to the Managing Director of Post Office Counters for endorsement, to effect any decisions consequent on acceptance recommendations as directed, to act as an escalation platform for the resolution of disputes over the severity assessment of individual acceptance incidents, and to act as an escalation platform for acceptance issues raised at the Acceptance Management Forum. In order to assist the Acceptance Board to make an appropriate acceptance recommendation, Post Office Counters prepared a hot list, as it was called, of all medium and high severity acceptance incidents observed during the core observation period. We can see from Poll 2028355 that as of 13th of August 1999, the hot list comprised of 3 acceptance incidents assessed by Post Office to be of high severity, 1 acceptance incident assessed by Post Office Counters to be of medium to high severity, and 11 acceptance incidents assessed by Post Office Counters to be of medium severity. I shall now explain in further detail the nature of the 3 acceptance incidents which were deemed by Post Office Counters to be of high severity. The first of these was AI, acceptance incident number 376. We can see that, no need to turn it up now, at Poll 3030393. This related to the integrity of the data which was fed from the EPOS to the transaction processing, the transaction information processing. You remember that's Post Office's own internal system for interfacing with Horizon in order to extract data for accounting purposes. Post Office Counters' analysis of the data fed into TIP revealed a discrepancy between the volume of transactions recorded by EPOS at the counter and the branch's weekly cash account, i.e. the aggregate of the weekly transactions produced by EPOS. According to Post Office Counters, the existence of this discrepancy had only come to light as a result of a temporary function performed by TIP by which it derived a cash account from the transaction data which it extracted from EPOS and compared this to the cash account which had been produced by Horizon. The Post Office assessed the business impact of this deficiency to be severe. The second of these was AI at 218, and we can see that at Poll 3028365. This AI related to the quality of the training course provided by ICL Pathway to assist sub-postmasters in preparing their weekly cash account. It was the perception of Post Office Counters that the poor quality of ICL Pathway's training could adversely affect the ability of end users to complete their daily balancing and produce a cash account. The knock-on effects of this deficiency, according to Post Office Counters, were that an excessive amount of time was being taken by end users, sub-postmasters, to produce their weekly cash account, the volume of calls being made to post office counter support services relating to cash account problems was unmanageable, and that significant time and resource was spent by Horizon field support officers and Horizon post office counters back-end services in remedying user errors. The third of these incidents was AI 298, which can be seen at poll 3030393. And this AI related to the overall stability of the system and concerned the occurrence of lockups, as they were called, or system freezes, as they were called, which had been observed to occur partway through the processing of a transaction on Horizon. The only remedial action open to the end user was to reboot the system. The deficiency was assessed by post office counters as being liable to cause a substantial loss of time and business, a loss of confidence in the system on the part of sub-postmasters and customers, a risk of accounting errors, and a severe disruption to post office counters' operating processes. Although ICL Pathway proposed a series of remedial measures to justify the downgrading or closure of each of these high-severity AIs, the parties ultimately agreed that acceptance of the core systems release had not been achieved at the conclusion of the operational trial review period. In an amendment to the codified agreement dated the 20th of August 1999, which came to be known as the first supplemental agreement, the parties agreed to undertake a programme of joint workshops for the purpose of agreeing resolution plans for all outstanding high and medium severity faults in the system. Peter Copping, Director of PA Consulting Group, was appointed as an expert to facilitate the effective resolution of the outstanding faults and, where necessary, to adjudicate on any unresolved disputes between the parties. In a timetable appended to that first supplemental agreement, it was planned that acceptance of the core systems requirements would be achieved by the 24th of September 1999. That's FUJ 50485. The joint workshops, which ran between the 20th of August and the 17th of September 1999, were chaired by the late Keith Barnes, head of Horizon Commercial, and Tony Oppenheim, Finance and Commercial Director of ICL Pathway. You'll be hearing from a number of witnesses who participated in these joint workshops, including John Meager, Horizon Acceptance Manager. Mr. Meager, who was responsible for managing the joint workshops on behalf of post office counters, will say, quote, Pathway would invite post office to accept that elements of an acceptance specification had been passed or had exclusions, i.e. issues that were understood and did not present a significant business impact and therefore could be parked for later attention. There was always disagreement on this impact assessment because post office always had correctly reviewed the business and operational impact, whereas Pathway, given that acceptance was dependent on there being fewer AIs than an agreed number, tended towards lower classifications. These workshops were effective in giving post office leverage to force Pathway to agree to make corrections. But by the 24th of September 1999, not all of the outstanding high and medium severity AIs had been resolved to the satisfaction of post office counters. The most serious of these concerned the data integrity issues associated with AI 376. Pathway's proposed remedial plan for this AI involved the development of a new piece of software known as, quote, the Accounting Integrity Control Release. You'll be hearing evidence from Tony Oppenheim, Finance and Commercial Director of ICL Pathway, who describes the release in the following terms. This is WIT N 0377-0100. The agreed solution, that is the agreed solution to AI 376, was a three-way reconciliation mechanism, otherwise referred to as an integrity check, that would validate that, one, the branch counters, two, TMS, that's Pathway's central system, and TIP, that's Post Office Counters' central system, were all balanced and in sync, Where they were not found to be in sync, the reconciliation would enable corrections to be made by either Pathway or Post Office counters in their respective TMS or TIP systems to bring TIP or TMS into line with the transactions logged at the counter and the cash account committed by the postmaster. Where they were found not to balance or a difference was identified between the transactions recorded in the branch and the cash account committed by the postmaster, the intention was that the reconciliation would identify the reason and enable it to be corrected. Given that the accounting integrity control release had not been developed and its efficacy was not yet proven, Post Office counters agreed to accept the Horizon system in late September 1999 on the condition that additional criteria aimed at demonstrating the efficacy of ICL Pathway's rectification plans were met. These criteria were contained in a further amendment to the codified agreement, which was signed on the 24th of September 1999 and which became known as the Second Supplemental Agreement. That's found at FUJ 30799316. In essence, this agreement permitted Post Office counters to suspend the rollout of the Horizon IT system in the event that ICL Pathway failed to demonstrate the effectiveness of the remedial measures which it had agreed to adopt in order to address Post Office counters' concerns. It would appear that this decision of Post Office counters to grant conditional acceptance of the system was not one which all of the senior managers involved in the Horizon programme felt able to endorse. You may wish in due course to explore in further detail how that decision was reached and why it was that some senior managers believed that the effectiveness of ICL Pathway's remedial measures ought to be proven before acceptance of the system rather than after it. Whilst the terms of the Second Supplemental Agreement were negotiated in late September 1999, further concerns were being voiced internally within ICL Pathway about the stability of the EPOS application. It would appear that a report on EPOS was produced on the 21st of September 1999, in which a series of recommendations were made to consider redesigning or rewriting EPOS in order to address its, quote, known shortcomings. Regrettably, Fujitsu has been unable to locate a copy of this important document. However, as a result of an internal development audit of the Core Systems Release Plus, which was conducted by ICL Pathway between the 8th of September and the 7th of October 1999, a further recommendation was made to the directors of ICL Pathway on or about the 22nd of November 1999 to reconsider the earlier recommendations that EPOS be redesigned or rewritten, either in whole or in part. That's Fujitsu 3079783. This further recommendation was made, quote, in the light of the continued evidence of poor product quality, which had emerged from the internal audit. The individual who was assigned ownership of this recommendation was Terry Austin, ICL Pathways Systems Director. In his evidence to the inquiry, Mr. Austin has stated that, quote, this option was debated at length by senior managers of the ICL Pathway management and technical teams, and the outcome was that we should embark on a major exercise to target the specific areas known to be the source of most, around 80% of the issues identified, which were error handling and printing. If this approach were unsuccessful, then a rewrite would be the only option available. However, the product did become stable and the number of outstanding defects did fall within the levels defined in the acceptance criteria. This explanation given by Mr. Austin does not, however, appear to match the justification given at the time by Mike Coombs, Programme Director, who on the 10th of May granted authorization to close the recommendation arising from the internal audit in the following terms. As discussed, this should be closed. Effectively, as a management team, we've accepted the ongoing cost of maintenance rather than the cost of a rewrite. Rewrites of the product will only be considered if we need to reopen the code to introduce significant changes in functionality. We will continue to monitor the code quality based on product defects as we progress through the final phases of testing and the introduction of the modified code set into live usage in the network. Given how the robustness of how important the robustness of EPOS was to the ability of sub-postmasters to account for the transactions performed over the branch counter, you, sir, will no doubt wish to scrutinise very carefully how this decision was reached by the directors of ICL Pathway and whether or not Post Office Counters was consulted about this decision, which in principle at least had far-reaching implications for its business. As a result of concerns about the adverse impact that rollout of the Horizon infrastructure was likely to have upon post office branches over the busy Christmas period, and in the light of ongoing concerns about the integrity of the data which was being fed into by EPOS into TIP, Post Office Counters decided to suspend the rollout of Horizon in late November 1999. This decision coincided with a growing dispute between ICL Pathway and Post Office Counters concerning the root causes of the continued cash account imbalances which were being observed during the ongoing monitoring of ICL Pathway's compliance with the conditions imposed on acceptance. ICL Pathway contended that one of the dominant causes of these imbalances was inaccurate or defective reference data being supplied by Post Office Counters. We can see an example of that at poll 28561. It's currently unclear whether and to what extent Post Office Counters accepted that the cash account imbalances being observed between October and November 1999 were attributable to its own reference data. In December 1999, Post Office Counters commenced negotiations with Pathway over the terms of a further amendment to the codified agreement, which became known as the Third Supplemental Agreement. At a joint meeting between ICL Pathway and Post Office Counters on the 14th of January 2000, it was noted that a decision to recommence the rollout of Horizon would not be made until further checks had been carried out by TIP to verify the efficacy of the accounting integrity control release and the terms of the Third Supplemental Agreement had been agreed. That's poll 28509. The Third Supplemental Agreement was signed by both parties on the 19th of January 2000. That's FUJ 00118186. According to Tony Oppenheim, the Finance and Commercial Director of ICL Pathway, this agreement tacitly acknowledged that the accounting integrity control did not provide a complete solution to the data integrity issues which had first been identified as part of AI 376. In his evidence of the inquiry, he will state, this is WITN 03770100, the Third Supplemental Agreement recognised that in some circumstances it would not be possible to identify what had gone wrong and therefore what correction should be made. Such instances were to be expressly disclosed by Pathway to Post Office Counters. Although not expressly stated, the logic was that it would fall to Post Office Counters as ultimate owner of the service and of the relationship with its clients and sub-postmasters to exercise judgment in such cases. So you will undoubtedly wish to explore whether or not Post Office Counters shared that understanding of the terms of the Third Supplemental Agreement, and if so, why it was that Post Office Counters frequently exercised its judgment in a manner which was so detrimental to the interests of its sub-postmasters. So that comes to the end of the opening on Phase 2. Can I turn to Phase 3, please?
Yeah, and to save you undue stress and your voice undue stress, once we get to about 10 past 4, quarter past 4, you choose your moment, all right?
Very kind, sir. Phase 3, introduction. I will now turn to the issues which you will be asked to consider as part of Phase 3 of the inquiry. They relate to the operation of the Horizon system. And when I say operation of the Horizon system, that is taken to include the training advice and assistance provided in respect of it. It will also touch upon the awareness of bugs and errors and the issue of how disputes about discrepancies were treated. However, the history of these issues will also be covered in phases 4, 5 and 6, and moreover, phase 7 will examine the current state of the provision of training, the available advice and assistance, and the dispute resolution mechanisms that are presently in place. This phase is divided into the following themes or issues. First, the quality of training that was provided to sub-postmasters and others working with Horizon. Secondly, the advice and assistance that was made available to them and its adequacy. Thirdly, the modifications made over the lifetime of Horizon, the reasons for those modifications, and the ways in which their success was reviewed. Fourth, the knowledge and rectification of bugs, errors and defects in the system. And fifth, the approach taken by Post Office to the resolution of disputes where discrepancies or alleged shortfalls appeared. So addressing each of those 5 themes in turn, training. By way of introduction, the starting point of this issue should of course be our list of issues, and the relevant section is found under the Horizon IT system subheading D, and you are asked to investigate and make findings on the following issues. What training was provided to sub-postmasters, managers and assistants on the use of Horizon? Who delivered that training? Did they have adequate experience and qualifications to do so? Was the training provided to sub-postmasters, managers and assistants adequate? And were there any changes or improvements to training over the years, and if so, what were they? It is hard to overstate the importance of the issue of training to this inquiry. Put another way, a fighter jet might be a pinnacle feat of engineering, but it is absolutely useless in the hands of someone without training, and indeed likely to be dangerous to someone who is inadequately trained. In a similar way, if one assumed that Horizon being rolled out in a near perfect state, and that's an assumption, from a computing perspective, sub-postmasters would still have required to be carefully trained to make the project a success. A common theme that runs through the Horizon story is the raising of user error, i.e. error by the sub-postmasters, as an explanation for apparent discrepancies. Even if it was assumed that there was no fault in the design of the Horizon IT system, it would still be important to examine the cause of user error, in particular whether the training was sufficient to minimize such errors. A good example of this is a peak, which we'll come to later, called PC 0129767, to be found at POL 401264. And that peak shows that a sub-postmaster had sold some currency, but had incorrectly entered into Horizon that this had been settled in cash rather than by a debit card. He sought to reverse this, but did so incorrectly, raising a discrepancy. I'm not going to delve into the issue now, but when we examine the peak in due course, we'll see that it says, as explained, the root cause is a user error, although it is also clear that the user documentation, which is Post Office Limited's responsibility, could be clearer. Here, the fact that something can be described as user error does not determine who is ultimately at fault for this discrepancy. You will read in the evidence numerous occasions when discrepancies were attributed to user error. Indeed, you've already heard a great deal of evidence on this issue as part of the human impact hearings. You'll recall Mr. Palmer, Kevin Palmer, gave evidence back on the 23rd of February 2022. He had a career in investment banking before coming to take over his mother's, Susanna Palmer's, post office branch after she had been suspended for alleged shortfalls. And you may recall Mr. Palmer's evidence that he did not receive training on how to balance accounts. He gave evidence on how he was often faced with discrepancies, which he would spend time checking against his records. He explained that at one stage he faced a discrepancy for over £60,000. And you may recall his evidence that he rang the help desk operator, who said, quote, "It was not possible for this to be as a result of system error, and simply advised me to check my figures again," end of quotes. You will wish to examine and make findings on the adequacy of the advice and assistance given, to which I will consider shortly. However, I raise this point now to highlight the adequacy of training provided to sub-postmasters would be a significant and important issue, even if one assumed that the Horizon system was robust. It's undoubtedly all the more important when the computer system itself is not robust. I've set out the issues that the inquiry is asked to consider in respect of training and why they are important. Can I now deal with the following issues? Firstly, briefly cover the scale of the training project that was to be undertaken on Rollout. Secondly, introducing the training programme that was designed to be delivered across the post office network during the national rollout, which training was provided by ICL Pathway. At this time, I'll introduce some of the themes and particular issues that you may wish to consider in respect of training generally. And then thirdly, I'll summarise briefly the timeline of the training after rollout, which was provided by Post Office, not ICL Pathway. So the scale of the training project. The rollout of Horizon brought with it the formidable task of training the entire Post Office network to use the system. And 2 points merit specific mention at this stage. The first is that the nature of the system that trainees were being asked to use. This task must be viewed in context, and we must cast our minds back to how sub-postmasters operated in the late 1990s. You will hear helpful evidence from the inquiry's expert, Charles Scipione, on this issue. He will paint a picture of the state of technology generally at this time. He notes that in 1998, it was estimated that only 31 to 33% of UK adults had a personal computer at home. Indeed, the Post Office itself carried out a survey of 100 sub-postmasters, counterclerks and assistants in 1999, which showed that 65% of them had used a computer before, and 83% of them were, quote, familiar with a keyboard. These are numbers that would be unheard of today, and so it's not uncontroversial to say that the Horizon system was revolutionary for the time, and also the more so for the work of the sub-postmasters. The second issue to consider is the widespread changes that were being made to the day-to-day processes of branches up and down the country by the mere introduction of an automated system. Horizon introduced a mandatory centralised system of work that sub-postmasters would have to follow precisely in order to operate their branches. Once rolled out, each sub-postmaster would have to use the same systems and processes to sell a stamp or to settle a cash account. You will hear evidence on how much a shift this was for sub-postmasters. In particular, you'll read about a perceived lack of, quote, conformance culture, end quote, across the Post Office network prior to the rollout of Horizon. I would suggest that these changes in business practice merit careful consideration by the inquiry, along with the more obvious changes brought about by the introduction of the computers themselves. Therefore, in order to investigate the adequacy of the training provided to sub-postmasters, it will be necessary to consider how the parties assess the baseline competencies and training needs of the Post Office network. It will be necessary to ask whether the training programme implemented was sufficient to meet those needs. In terms of training on rollout and contractual responsibilities, the Post Office contracted the responsibility to train the network to use Horizon to ICL Pathway. It will be necessary to consider the effect that this had on the adequacy of the training programme delivered. One can see that ICL Pathway would likely have had a better working knowledge of the Horizon system in order to design the training programme. It will be necessary, however, to investigate the extent to which the training took account of Post Office's businesses, the experiences of its network, and its day-to-day operations, particularly in respect of the alleged lack of conformance culture. It's helpful at this stage to note that ICL Pathway subcontracted aspects of its training responsibilities to a related company called Peritas Limited. Peritas changed its name during the period, so you may also see it referred to in the documents as ICL Training Services Limited or Knowledge Pool Limited. Can I turn then to examine some of the contractual responsibilities for training on rollout? And can we please bring up poll 302812. And can we turn, please, to page 24? Perfect. This, just to explain, is part of Schedule A15, you can see it at the top, of the codified agreement between ICL Pathway and Post Office. And this part of the schedule sets out Post Office's requirements in respect of the delivery of Horizon. And if we look at requirement 531, at paragraph 1.651, ICL Pathway agreed to deliver a training program that would, quote, enable Post Office's target audience to achieve acceptable standards in key competencies as defined by Post Office Counters Limited, with competence to be, quote, measured by a method agreed between Post Office and ICL Pathway on a date consistent with the project plan. And then over the page, please. Can we look at requirement 534? Thank you. At paragraph 1.68.1. This requirement, requirement 554, provided that ICL Pathway was to agree the training requirements for different groups, such as counter managers within the Post Office. It may be that the terms acceptable standards within this clause and competence leave much remaining open in respect of what level of training was actually required. But you will hear evidence in due course on how those concepts of what are acceptable standards and what competence meant were fleshed out and how that impacted the training to be delivered. This agreement went on to give further detail on ICL Pathway's obligations in requirement 915, but I'm going to turn to that provision in more detail later. The training provided on rollout, we can take that document down. I've spoken so far about the scale of the training project and the division of labour as between ICL Pathway and Post Office. You will hear evidence in due course on what training was actually provided to sub-postmasters. Can we turn, please, to FUJ 401357. And page 9, please. In fact, it might actually be page 10. Page 10 of the PDF, page 9 of the document. Thank you. This document as a whole is the 11th version of the Training and User Awareness Baseline document. This is a contract-controlled document setting out ICL Pathway's response to meeting Post Office's training needs. And if you can scroll down to the diagram This sets out the structure of the training programme. You can see that times in days or hours are allocated to parts of the training programme that were to be delivered as part of the national rollout. And down the right-hand side, a time scale by reference to day 0, which is at the bottom, i.e. the date by which they must be provided. And so sub-postmasters would be invited to training events as part of the rollout of Horizon at their branch. These training events would sit alongside the branch preparations to the conversion to Horizon itself. If we take that off the screen, the first formal training event was a non-mandatory user awareness training event. That was described as a 2.5-hour lecture-style event that will provide an overview of the function of Horizon itself and the training programme. The second formal training event was described as user training, and that training had to take place within 5 days of Horizon going live at that person's branch. That was subsequently elongated to up to 10 days before. Either way, the core training for the sub-postmaster took place, you'll note, within a relatively short period of time before Horizon going live at their branch. That user training is described as a classroom-based event where users would be instructed on how to use Horizon. You'll hear evidence that sub-postmasters were offered the course for managers, which including training on the accounting elements for Horizon, such as balancing, and that training lasted for 1.5 days. The counter assistants were offered a day-long course, which did not cover balancing in detail. I'm not going to go into the detail of the content of the training programs at this stage for 2 reasons. Firstly, it's clear that the training changed over the course of time, and it wouldn't be a helpful use of time to chart the changes in the course of this opening. They will be matters for you to consider in the Phase 3 hearings. And secondly, there will, I anticipate, be disagreement between witnesses over the facts during this period of rollout and indeed thereafter. And it will be important to read and hear those witnesses in full. Instead, in opening, can I just briefly identify a number of themes and issues which you may wish to grapple with when investigating training as part of Phase 3. Firstly, the assessment of baseline competencies and the analysis of training needs. Secondly, the adequacy of time made available for training and its content. Third, the collection and use of feedback. And fourth, the assessment of competence. So I noticed the time. Having teased you with those 4 topics, including the assessment of baseline competencies.
I have nothing else to think about tonight, Mr. Beer.
I'm afraid we're going to have to come back to it tomorrow.
Yeah, fine. What time are we starting tomorrow?
Can we start at 10 a.m., please, sir?
Certainly. And so far as the future programme is concerned, in inverted commas, we had a diversion of about 1.5 hours this morning, but that won't affect or shouldn't affect the progress of opening this week.
We should. We always had a half-day spare at the end on Friday afternoon, and so we should complete all openings by the end of Friday.
Excellent. I think everybody now knows that for personal reasons I can't be present in the inquiry room every day, but of course I'll be remote when I'm not in the inquiry room. But just in case there are people who will suddenly see a blank space and wonder what's happened, I'm still with you in spirit, if not in body.
Thank you, sir.